Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this Wednesday morning Facebook live stream from Pinnacle People Solutions. Good morning. I'm Bronwyn Pearson from Pinnacle People Solutions, and welcome to our daily Facebook Live update. So our company, Pinnacle People Solutions, provides human resource services and solutions to regionally based small to medium enterprises and not-for-profit organisations, and we're here to help you and your business through what are increasingly challenging COVID-19 times. I'll be live at 9:15 every weekday and have been for about nearly 2 weeks actually. And with updates on new information and more detailed information about topics relating to staffing as well as to business management. So please don't hesitate to ask me any questions that you have as we go along. I noticed we've had a number join us this morning. Good morning to Jess, Joe and Claire, and others who have joined us so far. So please ask any questions that you have as we go along. I will see them as they pop up in the comments stream, and I'll do my best to answer them on the spot ideally, but I can also take them on notice and answer them in the next live stream, which of course is tomorrow morning. So outside this, you can of course contact me and my marvellous team anytime via Facebook, of course. And email or telephone. The details my lovely team I'm sure are going to put up in the comments in just a moment. So feel free to get in touch with us in whatever way, shape or form works for you to ask us any questions that you might have, or any needs that you have that we can support you with. So thank you so much, team. I noticed our contact details have just gone up, so thank you so much for that, and good morning also to Michelle and to Sean for joining us. I'm delighted to have everybody here this morning. So some breaking news, big changes, any big changes overnight is the first thing that we get stuck into each morning on these live streams. The first, of course, the big ticket item is that the JobKeeper legislation is currently under consideration and will be voted on in federal parliament today. So we do understand at this point in time, and of course we'll wait to see what comes out later today, but we do understand that businesses will be allowed to reduce their employees' hours until their earnings equal the $1,500 a fortnight JobKeeper payment in this legislation, but only if there is not enough work for them to stay on their usual roster under the proposed new laws. So tune in tomorrow morning as well, please. We'd love to see you. We will be doing a special unpacking of the JobKeeper legislation and what it means for employers and for employees. The devil, as we know, is often always in the details. So our plan is to get stuck into that tomorrow morning, and the eligibility criteria and all of those things. Obviously, at this moment, we've had principles of what this will look like, but we'll wait and see come the end of today as to what the situation is for those who may or may not be eligible for JobKeeper. So also today, and I'm just going to find my notes in respect of this. Also overnight, we've had the National Cabinet endorse a mandatory code of conduct for small to medium enterprise commercial leasing principles during COVID-19. So I'm just going to give you a quick overview of those principles. So good morning, Lisa. Thank you for joining us also this morning. So in terms of the leasing principles, this code will be translated into the necessary temporary legislative changes that will need to happen at the state level to deal with commercial tenancies, of course. But I guess the leasing principles that the National Cabinet have endorsed, that they have asked be applied as soon as practicable on a case-by-case basis is that, first and foremost, landlords must not terminate leases due to the non-payment of rent during COVID-19's pandemic period or during a reasonable subsequent recovery period. Similarly, tenants must remain committed to the terms of their lease, subject to any amendments to their rental agreement that might be negotiated under the code, and material failure to abide by substantive terms of a lease would forfeit any protections provided to the tenant under this particular code. So it's important to have a good look at the detail on this. The third principle in respect of the code will be that landlords must offer tenants proportionate reductions in rent payable in the form of waivers and deferrals of up to 100% of the amount ordinarily payable on a case-by-case basis based on the reduction in the tenant's trade during the COVID-19 pandemic period and a subsequent reasonable recovery period. So essentially what the National Cabinet have supported is a similar consideration of the percentage decreases in business that come about that might make businesses eligible for the JobKeeper legislation. So rental waivers, this code talks about, must constitute no less than 50% of the total reduction in rent payable over the pandemic period, and should constitute a greater proportion of the total reduction in rent payable in cases where failure to do so would compromise the tenant's capacity to fulfil their ongoing obligations under the lease agreement. Obviously, regard must also be given to the landlord's financial ability to provide such additional waivers. Thank you so much, team. The team have just put up the National Cabinet's Code of Conduct for Commercial Leasing Principles, so you can go in and have a look at that detail yourself. Payment of any rental deferrals by the tenant must be amortised over the balance of the lease term and for a period of no less than 2 years, whichever is the greater, unless otherwise agreed to by the parties, being the tenant and the landlord. Any reduction in statutory charges, so land tax, council rates or insurances, will be passed to the tenant, onto the tenant in the appropriate proportion applicable under the terms of the lease. So this is a requirement for the landlord to pass those reductions in statutory charges onto their tenants. And a landlord, the principles also state a landlord should seek to share any benefit it receives due to deferral of loan payments provided by a financial institution as part of the Australian Bankers Association COVID-19 response, or any other case-by-case deferral of loan repayments offered to any other landlords with the tenant in a proportionate manner. So there's an expectation that the landlords will pass on any benefits that they receive to their tenants. Landlords should also, should, where appropriate, seek to waive recovery of any other expense or outgoing payable by a tenant under lease terms during the period the tenant is not able to trade. Landlords reserve the right to reduce services as required in such circumstances, of course. No fees, interest or other charges should be applied with respect to rent waived in respect of the principles I mentioned just a moment ago, and no fees, charges or punitive interest may be charged on deferrals. Landlords are not allowed to draw on a tenant's security for the non-payment of rent, whether this be a cash bond, a bank guarantee or personal guarantee, during the period of the pandemic and or a reasonable subsequent recovery period. And the tenant should be provided with the opportunity to extend their lease for an equivalent period of the rent waiver and or deferral period outlined in the earlier principle. And this is intended to provide the tenant additional time to trade on existing lease terms during the recovery period after the pandemic concludes. Landlords are also required to agree to a freeze on rent increases, except for retail leases based on turnover rent, for the duration of the pandemic and a reasonable subsequent recovery period, notwithstanding any arrangements that might already exist between the landlord and the tenant. And landlords are also not allowed to apply any prohibition on levy any penalties if tenants reduce their opening hours or cease to trade due to the COVID-19 pandemic. There are also, and I won't go into the details now because we've got other information we want to cover off with you this morning, but there are also requirements in that code regarding binding mediation and so forth. And the code is mandated to come into effect in all states and territories from a date following the 3rd of April, which is the date that the National Cabinet agreed to the set of principles to guide the code, and to be defined by each jurisdiction for the period during which the Commonwealth JobKeeper Program remains operational. So this code's being allied to that same period of time as for the JobKeeper program. So that's just giving you a little bit of an overview of that. Also, we've had that come out. The details of that come out in the last 24 hours. The other sort of emphasis that's come in the last 24 hours, not surprisingly, is for us all to stay at home at Easter. Community transmission rates remain a real concern. So while the numbers are falling in terms of what we have had previously, the community transmission rates and hospital admissions are the things that the government is particularly concerned about, and staying at home, social distancing, and so forth are incredibly important components of, and isolation, of course, incredibly important components of trying to get those numbers down. So today's spotlight topic is what are your options in your business if you're not eligible for JobKeeper, or not all your staff might be eligible for JobKeeper. Obviously, we will be doing a deep dive tomorrow into the legislation itself and all of the eligibility criteria and so forth. So we'll be able to answer more specifically in respect of eligibility, etc. tomorrow. But if you have already spoken to your accountant or financial advisors and you're thinking that you may not be eligible or not all of your staff might be eligible, then there are options available to you in terms of negotiating pay and hours changes with staff. You've also got options in terms of standing staff down, or indeed needing to potentially terminate staff. The reason that you need to care about how you do this at this point in time is that you need to get your options correct. It's really important that you do what you're required to lawfully do as an employer. Otherwise, you escalate the level of risk to your business at a time when, quite frankly, you can least afford to. So would really encourage you to be very clear about the expectations and what you need to do. You can do what you need to do very, very quickly, but it is important that you do it lawfully. Okay, so list of some of the things to consider in terms of if you're not eligible to for JobKeeper. One of the questions we've had in respect of that is, what about staff I've employed after the 1st of March? The answer to that question is very straightforward. Unfortunately, they're not covered by JobKeeper. Only staff who are on your payroll on the 1st of March are actually eligible to receive JobKeeper, if you indeed as an employer are eligible. So, unfortunately, if you put new staff on or you put replacement staff on after the 1st of March, they won't be eligible. The most important thing you need to consider at this point in time, and I'm sure all of us as business owners have a very sharp eye on this, but if you don't currently, because it's all been a bit overwhelming, it's incredibly important that you get onto this immediately, which is, what is your cash flow forecast? And what can you afford and not afford to do? These are questions that you need to answer very quickly. Some of this information will become more relevant once we know the details of JobKeeper eligibility, etc. tomorrow. You may not be entirely sure yet whether you'll be eligible. Whether or not at the moment you think you're eligible, very important to go up on the ATO website, however, and register your business. We'll have details tomorrow as to eligibility, so we'll know that then, but it really is important to register in the first instance, even if you think there's a remote chance that you might be. Now, eligibility, as we understand it at this point, is that your staff are obviously, and your business is obviously covered by the federal employment relations system. So one of the things that has come up recently in respect of JobKeeper, and even things like the childcare package that was released a few days ago, there are questions that have been raised about those who are employed by state-based corporations or local government, and who might work in some of these industries but not actually be employed under the federal employment relations system. You aren't covered, unfortunately, by JobKeeper. JobKeeper is for the national employment system. There is discussion underway between the states and federal governments about how some of those industries might be supported financially that are at the state and local level. But JobKeeper is explicitly for staff and businesses that are covered under the Fair Work Act and all of the associated modern awards. So that is important to know. Thank you. My staff have just put up the ATO link that you can go directly to and register your business for JobKeeper. We'll have details as to eligibility minutiae tomorrow morning after the legislation hopefully comes down later today. Okay, so it is important for you to know what your cash flow forecast is and what you can afford and not afford to do. One of the other key questions that you need to ask for your business is, do you have money available to pay staff entitlements? We've talked to numbers of businesses at this point in time, small to medium-sized enterprises who might have a book value for their leave entitlements for staff, but they actually don't have that provisioned in their budgets. That is a matter of some concern, and it certainly will impact if you were to make staff redundant, for example. You might be a small business under the Fair Work Act, so have under 15 headcount of staff, not full-time equivalent, let me be clear, that is headcount. And that includes regular and systematically working casuals. If you have under 15 headcount in that definition I just gave you, then you would not be required to pay weeks per years of service in a termination pay if you made a staff position redundant, but you would, however, be required to pay notice of termination and all accrued leave entitlements, those being annual leave and long service leave. If in New South Wales somebody has served more than 5 years with you, under the Long Service Leave Act you are obligated to pay pro rata long service leave after 5 years. If you are not in a position to be able to pay staff entitlements in the event that you have to let staff go, you should talk immediately with your financial advisor, and we may even be able to source, in fact, a link for you to free financial advice that you might be able to get in respect of that. So, but these are important questions. If you don't believe that you might be eligible for JobKeeper, which is A, you're in the federal system, so your staff are covered by the Fair Work Act, and secondly, that you've seen if your turnover is under 50 million a year, then you need to be able to demonstrate a 30% reduction due to COVID. We will have more details on tomorrow's broadcast following the legislation coming down as to how businesses can demonstrate that eligibility. If your business is not under 50 million, it's under $1 billion. If it's over $1 billion, then you've got to be able to demonstrate a 50% reduction in order to qualify for JobKeeper. Some of the options, as I said, that you would have available to you would be to discuss with your staff the challenges that exist, your concern about whether or not the company might be eligible for JobKeeper, and asking staff to come forward and talk to you about the possibility of varying their hours or their pay. Now, it is the case, not always the case, but obviously you're required to pay staff a minimum relative to either the minimum wage, or if staff are covered by a modern award, the modern award rates. But there are a lot of instances in certain industries where staff get paid considerably above award, and in a normal market situation that would be appropriate for employers to do relative to maintaining a degree of competitive advantage or keeping up with what the market is paying in terms of salaries, etc. But if you're in that situation and you currently are paying staff above their award entitlements, either to remuneration or any other conditions, you can ask them to have a conversation about varying those things. We do understand, and again, tune in tomorrow because we'll know the detail, but we do understand that there will be the capacity for employers who do get covered by JobKeeper to be able to vary hours back to fit under the $1,500 a fortnight JobKeeper payment. But if you're not eligible for JobKeeper as an employer, or your employer isn't and you're an employee, then you would need to willingly agree in writing with your employer to vary those current conditions that you have, perhaps for a fixed period of time. The employer can't unilaterally do that without your agreement. Of course, the employer may be wanting to talk to you about that as initial options that they may be considering. They may well have to go back to the drawing board and consider stand downs and terminations as potential alternatives. Thank you very much, team. Good morning to Susanna, to Lauren, to Amber and to Jessica for joining us this morning. Thank you, Michelle. Service New South Wales has a concierge service that Michelle has just put up the link to. Thank you very much for doing that for us. I really appreciate that. Very simple steps for if you don't believe that your business might be covered by JobKeeper. First of all, be very clear. Get very clear about your business's financial position and what your options might be in terms of managing that moving forward. Step 2, talk to a specialist about all your options and how to put them in place. You can do so very, very quickly. If you need to move quickly, which a lot of businesses already have, and a lot of businesses will continue to need to do that, that can happen quickly, but you need to understand what your options are, and you would need to talk to a specialist to make sure that happens. We're available 24/7 for you to call us and talk to us about your situation. The first conversation with us, the first hour's conversation, is absolutely obligation free. So it may well be that you get the answers that you need in that period of time. We can then provide further specialist support to your business moving forward if you need that as well. So in terms of questions, I haven't had any questions in the comments screen yet. We've got links going up in at the moment for help finding a financial counsellor. Our team's put up the link for the government's Money Smart website, so you can access that. The business concierge service from Service New South Wales has gone up there as well. I have had a question from when we did the presentation Monday on workers' comp and COVID-19, and that was regarding workers' compensation. Do I, as the employer, have to determine whether my employee contracted COVID-19 at work? The answer to that question is no. Your insurer will do that. So that's not something that you need to ascertain as part of any claim that you might have made against your business by a staff member who contracts COVID-19. The employee will put in a claim anyway, and on the report of injury form, provide as much information to the insurer as they can about how they may have contracted the virus, including any others that they may have come into contact with in the workplace who may have already been diagnosed with COVID-19 or more recently diagnosed. So if you are an employee, if you believe that you have contracted or you've been told you've contracted COVID-19 and you believe that occurred in the course of doing your work, then on the report of injury form, you should provide as much information to the insurer as you can about how you believe you may have contracted the virus, including your exposure to any others who may have been diagnosed in the work environment. As the employer, your insurer will determine whether the claim meets the necessary criteria or not. You don't, as the employer, need to determine whether your employee contracted COVID-19 at work. So, do I have any other questions at this point in time? Nothing yet in the comments, but of course you've got plenty of opportunity to ask us questions in a whole range of other forms, of course. Tomorrow's topic will be, as I foreshadowed at the outset, a comprehensive deep dive into the JobKeeper legislation, which will be coming through at some stage today. Now, in tomorrow, we will look quite specifically at the eligibility criteria, also the resultant temporary changes to the Fair Work Act and what those implications are for you as employers and also as employees. So you know what your employers are allowed to do and not to do and what you might expect. We'll also hopefully be able to answer all or as many questions as possible regarding the implications for payment of superannuation, taking of leave, your staff potentially working for another employer as well as for you under JobKeeper. These are all areas that we will hopefully be able to unpack in some detail for you tomorrow morning once we've had a review overnight of the legislation when it comes down later today. So I'm conscious we've got 3 minutes remaining before the end of this podcast. It's not really a podcast, is it? It's a live stream. Sorry, wrong word. So we really appreciate you joining us. I am able to answer any questions that you might have if you want to put them in the comments screen for the next couple of minutes. Otherwise, I will finish up for today. As I said, if you don't believe that you're eligible for JobKeeper, there are a range of other things as a business that you may need to do, that you can do, that you need to know how to do properly in terms of reducing your workforce or reducing the hours that are being worked in your business, things that you will need to know if you need to cease trade or if work has stopped in part or in full in terms of your business. So please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. Lisa has asked the question, can that person be re-employed as a part-time person, then be eligible for JobKeeper? Lisa, I'm thinking that what you're asking me is whether you could vary an existing staff member's hours and terms and conditions from full-time to part-time. Is that what you're asking me? If you could just give me an indication about that, that would be really helpful. So, for example, if you're not, and before Lisa answers me, I might just explore this a little bit. So, if you don't believe that you will, or you're unsure whether you'll be eligible for JobKeeper, and again, we should know a lot more detail about that tomorrow morning. You could have a negotiated agreement with your staff member to reduce their hours or rate of pay, assuming you're paying above award or minimum wage. You could actually agree with them for a temporary period of time to, or permanently potentially if they are in agreement, to reduce them from full-time to part-time. You might then be eligible for JobKeeper. I think that's what Lisa's asking me. And if that were the case, then you would be obligated to pay your employee $1,500 a fortnight. Whether that was greater than the amount they might subsequently be earning having reduced their pay and hours, the $1,500 is what's required. If you've reduced somebody's hours and pay, you're then eligible for JobKeeper, and the $1,500 is still not, they're still earning more than $1,500 a fortnight. What we understand will happen if you're eligible for JobKeeper is that you can actually reduce that person's hours further. But again, please tune in tomorrow, because that level of detail we should have once the legislation is passed. Lisa hasn't given me, oh no, casual to part-time. Okay, can a casual be re-employed as a part-time person, then be eligible for JobKeeper? Lisa, if you had somebody as a casual who doesn't meet the JobKeeper eligibility for the 1st of March, which we understand at the moment, and again, this is subject to the legislation coming through, so I'd encourage you to tune in tomorrow morning. If you've got a casual on your books from on the 1st of March, which is one of the eligibility criteria, they haven't been working regularly and systematically for you, so they wouldn't necessarily, under the current eligibility criteria as we understand it, be eligible for JobKeeper. And you were to change their employment status from casual to part-time, I'm going to have to take that question on notice, to be truthful. That's going to really depend on what the eligibility criteria looks like, because while they will have been on your books on the 1st of March, the nature of their employment will have shifted. So I'm going to have to take that on notice and ask you to come back tomorrow morning, when I will be able to answer that question. I'm sure there's going to be a whole lot of curly and interesting questions that occur in that period of time. I would think that they would be covered, but please don't hold me to that. We have a disclaimer on all of these for these reasons, that we're trying to advise as information becomes available. But I will certainly do my best to answer that question, Lisa, tomorrow once we have more detail. We are 2 minutes over. My apologies for being over. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you have specific questions about your business, or you want to have a discussion or need us to help you out, contact us anytime. Email, Facebook, phone. This live stream will go up onto our PPS page. You can watch it again. It will also be on our PPS YouTube channel and in LinkedIn. So we have a range of places that you can get access to the information. Tomorrow, of course, as I've mentioned a number of times, we'll be focusing on the new JobKeeper legislation, which we understand to come down today. We will be burrowing into that overnight and have a live stream for you tomorrow morning on that. So please invite your colleagues and friends. It's possible that tomorrow's live stream might go for longer than half an hour. I'm open to that as a possibility, given the detail we might have to get into. So please be prepared for that. If you'd like to join us in the morning, we'd encourage you to do so. Invite your colleagues and friends. Stay safe in the meantime. Wash your hands repeatedly. Stay at home. And I'll look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining us.